Um, the mind, in when I'm talking about the mind in this respect, let us boil it down to, or narrow it down to, um, the thinking mind,
Mm-hmm.
or the part of the mind that people begin to call the monkey mind.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact the mind itself is much broader than that, because it's got a whole lot of other functions to do, including keeping you alive while you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And uh, so, first off, then the mind, that is the thinking part of the mind, um, goes kind of up and down. But one of the qualities that it has, for the untrained mind, is that it is almost constantly thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and that dreaming during the night also happens quite a lot, and that's nothing more than the thinking mind that just hasn't shut up yet, even
Mm.
though the more primitive parts of the mind has shut the body down, and most of the consciousness, still that thinking is going on, and that what's happening now is that you're beginning to train that,
Mm-hmm.
which means that, yes, you use the word rebel. In a way, it kind of does. But in another kind of way, you would think, well, it's not really possible for it to rebel,
Mm.
but there's other ways of looking at how we perceive this rebellion. And that one of them for sure is the one that you were about to mention, which was that as sati improves, that means that we're more alert to what the mind is doing. So in the beginning, the student will not catch the mind wandering away, that it's wandering away, and the student is not aware of it, that he's part of the wandering, that he just goes with the thought process. But when we kind of bring a station, or a stationary thing, or something that is slowed down, and the breath is a really good object for doing that. And in fact, for teaching the rest of the Dhamma, is absolutely the best. Though there are other things that will focus the mind very quickly, almost suddenly. Still, that doesn't have a whole lot of value. An example of that would be the casino for fire, because students, everybody does it.
Mm.
We when we see it's the moth to the flame.
And kids do it.
Kids do it, exactly.
Yeah.
Kids will just get absorbed into watching. It can be a candle, the
Mm-hmm.
candle meditation
Go camping.
when they're out camping. Precisely. I was
We
about to.
call it. We
You're
call
telling my story for me.
it. We call it the bush telly.
The what?
The bush telly.
Telly. What did it?
Television. The bush
Oh,
television.
the campfire is the bush telly.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, the television itself has that capability of capturing the mind,
Oh, yeah.
because of the movement and the lights on the TV screen.
It's almost like it reaches out and grasps at you sometimes.
Exactly so. And so this is why some people are enamored by the casino meditation or the fire meditation. There's actually entire temples, many of them by the thousands in India still, that are dedicated to fire worship.
Hmm.
So uh, actually, I was at one time and was enamored by this pile of rock that was really hot. But upon close inspection, it wasn't a rock at all. It was the ash over a configuration of wooden logs and things like that. And that their idea is they've got to keep the fire going. That's one of the characteristics of that kind of fire worship. So let's get back to Anapanasati, because if you look at it like this, Anapanasati has some characteristics of the fire meditation in the sense that there is some movement there. The same thing is true with water meditations or air meditation, because the air
Curious about
meditation.
these other elemental meditations. How do you go about practicing these?
Well, one of the ways is with the mud kasina. These round kasinas are normally 4 to 6 inches around, and that they can be stitched together leaves, and the stitching is done by twigs or small plants, small long plants, reeds, things like that. And so you'll stitch this thing, or it can be a mud pie. They go down to the riverbank and grab up some mud, and then they'll put it into this disc shape and let it dry in the sun. So now you've got the kasina. What are you going to do with it? You're going to look at it.
It's crazy Buddhists.
No, this is not Buddhist. Believe me,
Okay.
the Buddhist recorded this.
Okay,
But
yeah.
this was the kind of stuff that was done even before the time of the Buddha.
Okay.
And they still do it in India without using the word Buddhist. So don't use the word crazy Buddhist. And in fact, the first Buddha was not crazy enough to figure out this stuff doesn't work. But the idea then is to take this kasina and look at it and keep looking at it, and then close your eyes and try to mentally reconstruct that which you were looking at. And then you open your eyes and you go back and you research it, you look at it, you get the details, you figure out what things are about, because even though a mud kasina, you would think of it, if it's very, very smooth mud like bone china, that there would be no irregularities. But if you go down to the riverbank and you get the mud and make a mud pie out of that, then there's going to be remnants of fingerprints. There's going to be big grains of sand mixed in. There's going to be an occasional piece of a leaf that shows. There's all kinds of stuff that's going to be in that mud. And so then the object of the meditator is to look at this kasina and memorize it in exquisite detail. So that actually then you can see how that really does focus the mind, because this is not easy to do. If you practice it, you can see how hard it actually is to do. And it takes sometimes years to get one kasina down.
Wow. Shit.
Okay, and so they're normally known by the colors. Now, one of the interesting things about the Pali language is that the blue color and the green color are generally the same word. And so you have to translate it into English in the proper context. And so when you don't know what the blue kasina is, it's not blue, it's green. Okay. Because it's naturally constructed out of leaves. That if you were going to do a real blue kasina, then the easiest and best way to do that would be doing sky gazing, which is then not even that kind of kasina meditation. It's a completely different meditation in the sense of sky or air. And when you're doing that, what you're doing is you're watching closely the movements of the air, the movements of the cloud. You could also almost go to the point of saying that this was the origins of meteorology, of actually figuring out that you could see what the clouds were about to produce for you. That it's partly cloudy now. Is it going to be sunny soon, or is it going to be drizzling soon? And they can begin to see how that cause-effect relationship is.
It's another one that everyone does as well, sky gazing.
At night, it's stargazing, but it's still the air meditation, looking up into the air. One of the qualities of that is that our vision stays at an almost infinite level, that we're looking at things that are very, very far away, to where with the water meditation and the kasina meditation and the fire meditation, the visual object is fairly close, within a foot or 2 or 4 feet, something like that. But the air meditation, now there's another kind of meditation that's in between uh, an earth and a sky meditation, and that would be to focus on a particular physical object, like a mountain, that's very, very far away, and that you keep your eye focused on that. And for instance, if you're riding in a boat, or maybe in a modern day, you're on a train or in a passenger of a car, and you're passing by, then it's quite naturally, these things are natural to do, is to get the eye set on that mountain that's approaching, and to keep watching it as you approach it, as you get close to it, and then as you pass it by. Now you've got to turn your head to keep the focus, but you always continue to focus, or to remember to focus on that mountain.
Mm.
Because what that does is that it puts the visual part of the mind, as do all of these casinos, in, let us say, in charge gear, as opposed to having the verbal part of the mind, or the auditory part of the mind normally is what's kind of in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these casino meditations that were based upon real earth, real water, real fire, air, now are taken on to the inside of the body, so that you have the real body of, or the real kaya, the real earth as your body. The real water is not necessarily the fluids and excrements and all of that out of the body, but that's still considered part of the body. That it's the emotions, the way that we feel, that we're fluid, that we're not the same, that we're angry and we're sad and we're happy and we're crazy, and all kinds of things that have to do with the way that we feel. And then the fire element is the mental capabilities altogether. The fire is that which burns and consumes, just like we can consume information. And then the air is associated with the thoughts, because the thoughts are like clouds themselves. They just ripple through. All right. So in this regard, then we have the foundations for our mindfulness, or the foundations for what we're going to be paying attention to. So this would be the patana, and the patana then is the base. The base for practice would be then the satipatthana, to keep remembering the body, to keep remembering to watch the body. And the first
Ah,
aspect we're doing is we're watching the breath.
I was going to ask you this question. What is Satipatthana?
We
And
just did it. I've
you
already
just did
given
it.
you an extremely detail of the satipatthana.
There you go.
That happens. I answer questions before they're asked, or I'll
It
mention.
does happen quite a lot.
Pardon?
It does happen quite a lot.
It's part of being in tune with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So this satipatthana are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Then the body, the feelings, the mind itself, and in this case, what we're thinking about is a little bit different, because we're thinking about the mind as verbal, but sometimes we use the word sita in the sense of the mind of emotion, and we normally then have let us say 3 components. The ability to really see. And when I'm saying to be able to see, has to do with recognizing, or events, or let us call it knowledge or wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the ability to actually see, rather than merely cast our eyes upon an object and thinking about it. There's the ability to see. This is actually that which most people don't have very well developed. And that the neurophysiology, neuroscience has defined that then as the frontal lobe. And it's easy to understand because this is a part of the mind that the dogs don't have. The ability that's given us our culture, the thing that makes us human different from dogs, is not language, because dogs have their own language.
Mm-hmm.
Ape groups have their own language. Even bees and ants have language. Elephants, very good at language. Dolphins and orcas, very good at language. So we can't say that the big difference between humans and animals is language. That what it is the ability to see and to know.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that ability to see and to know, the human language is much more sophisticated than the animal's language, but the animals get it done on a more primitive level. But you can't say all that humans have language and animals don't. No, what we have is the ability to voice. That we developed the voice because we had a need for that kind of sophisticated language. There was a great ape. I forget her name. I think it was Lucy, who died a few years ago. But at her height, she had a vocabulary of 600 words that they taught her to sign,
Mm.
and she was quite fluent
Mm.
with that language that she
In
had.
okay.
So, what we're now getting at then is we got the three parts of the mind. We have the primitive part of the mind that controls the body and gives us our feelings, and the feelings are part of a survival mechanism. In other words, the danger is communicated through a set of mechanisms that we perceive and understand in human language to be fear. So if there is danger, then the body will go into, in a very primitive animal, like an alligator, when it seems danger, it responds with let us say, a electrochemical system inside the body that the humans have too. It's similar. Ours is more human, and we express that feeling as the feeling of fight, flight, fear, um, and the associated things like rage or anger is nothing but our response to loss or the fear of losing more. The thought of I've got to put a stop to it means that I'm afraid and that whatever's happening needs to be stopped because I feel bad about it. And the basic feeling is that of fear. And so, as a practicing student of Anapanasati, then one of the things that we're going to work with is to get down to or go to the point of uncovering this fear, learning how to work with it, so that then we can choose to be fearless.
Mm-hmm.
And so fearlessness is a major part of what the teachings of the Buddha was, to where mud meditations and fire casinos, that's not the teaching of the Buddha. So uh, this part of the mind then that we're going to work with is that we're going to wake up the frontal cortex, the ability to see.
Mm-hmm.
This is what sati is all about, and that's why we put it that way. Of being mindful means to wake up, or to pay attention, or to look, or to observe, or to see what's going on inside the mind. That basically this is also noted as step 9 of Anapanasati, in the sense of experiencing the mind. Well, the only way that you can experience the mind is by looking at it, by observing it. And that the easiest way for students to get started to do that is to observe whether they're remembering to watch the breath or whether the mind has wandered away from the breath. This is how every beginning student gets started. But that little mechanism that we're talking about gets more and more sophisticated to the point that it manages then everything in the sense of, am I afraid or not?
Mhm.
Am I angry or not? Or all of those kind of feelings. Is the mind in an exalted state or not? Does this feel really good or not? These are the kinds of questions that we begin to ask ourselves that are associated then using language, but really the investigation is through this frontal cortex, and we're only then using language to give concepts that humans have learned to live in conceptualizations rather than in experience.
Mm.
So that's another quality that the meditation is going to bring, is by quieting the mind or working with the verbal. We're going to see uh, the value, the use in that verbalization, and also the value in the use of having more control over it so that you can think the thoughts you want to think, or you can actually bring it down to very few thoughts and then eventually none at all. And so that's basically a part of the practice then. So in the beginning, the only thing that we're doing is, are you on the breath or is the mind wandering away? Later, we start saying, okay, we're only going to let the mind think about wholesome things. And one of the most wholesome things to think about is this here now moment that's associated with breathing. And so we begin to focus the mind down on, or another way of saying it is beginning to limit its vocabulary. And one of the criteria for limiting the vocabulary is, are these vocal thoughts that I'm having part of the past, part of the future, part of planning? Or are these thoughts that I'm having associated with what's happening right now over the course of this moment? And that moment may last from a split second up to 10 or 15 seconds, sometimes longer. That's why we use the word moment, is because the word second and the word minute, those belong to the clock.
Mm.
But the moment, that belongs to the reality, the here now. And it is not defined by the ticks of a clock, it's defined by our experience. Okay, so you could think of the tick of the clock then in that rate is uh, the experience. When the experience clock ticks, that means we move from one experience to a new experience to a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of the mistake that humans make is that we kind of don't see this shifting of experience. And so, because we're not seeing it, just like someone looking at a casino, an earth casino for the very first time, doesn't see much distinction. But as you begin to inspect, you begin to see a great deal of detail. And that one of the details then, or one of the aspects of seeing the details of things, because now we're really looking, is who we think we are was dependent upon not looking very closely. And so we saw a smooth, homogeneous self. But now that we're really beginning to inspect, we're seeing ridges and valleys and all kinds of stuff in there that we couldn't see before. And then they say, wait a minute, who am I? Am I this valley, or am I this ridge, or am I this leaf sticking out of the mud, or am I this big grain of sand, or anything like that? And I'm using an analogy for that. Because we then begin to understand, I am not my anger. I am not this body.
Mm-hmm.
I am not these thoughts that I'm having. When I'm angry at the bully, I am not only just the one who is angry at the bully. Because I'm not angry at the bully all the time. I'm only angry at the bully when I think about the bully. And so I bring up my own anger. All right. So this is basically what we're beginning to understand is that by really looking closely at what's going on, because our sati is good, which means we can continue to remember to come back and look at what's going on. And that description then of what's going on is very wholesome, as opposed to observing what's going on, but letting the mind just wander in the background, because that's possible. Basically, they call it wandering along in the background, when in fact what's happening is there's a movement back and forth between the two. So while I'm watching an in breath, I'm going back and forth. And so I think that those thoughts are in the background, where in fact, no, they're just taking up a short mind moment. So during the beginning, or let us say during the entire length of the in breath, a whole lot of stuff can happen in the mind. And so we begin to pay attention to that so that we can begin to guide what kind of thoughts we're going to have. Because then what we want is to go from the here now of the breath to thinking about here now of the breath to watching the here now of the breath, and continue to come back to the moment, and being here now is one of the ways of limiting the mind. But there's actually other things that are useful for us to do with the mind, and this is actually pointed out both in the Satipatthana Sutta and in the Anapanasati Sutta, that what do we do with the mind when the mind is, let us say, capable or under control enough that we can start putting into the mind what we want to put into mind, rather than letting the mind decide for itself what it wants to have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So in that regard, we can begin to see, there's a difference between the mid-cortex, or the verbal part of the brain, and the frontal cortex. That we let the anterior cortex and the mid-cortex of the brain, the thinking part of the brain, just go anywhere and do anything they want to, while the frontal cortex, which generally takes a whole lot more energy, a whole lot more blood, because it's, after all, your supercomputer.
Mm-hmm.
But if your cell phone and your laptop together can do all the computing that you need to do, why don't you turn the supercomputer off?
Yeah.
That's what happens to people. They go back then into primary mode, or back into instinctual mode, because that's the easiest way to do it.
I've been cutting internet use out so much past couple of years, finding exactly what you're saying, just this frontal lobe's getting more and more active. I'm actually able to think through things a lot better than I was in the past. But yeah, 100% that's happening widespread across the world. It's worrying.
Yes, okay. Well, there's many little tiny aspects into the world waking up. The internet has had something to do with it, and along with the internet, then widespread what we would call Fox News, FAUX.
Mm-hmm.
Or
cheeky.
or fake news.
Yeah.
Or that what we're really beginning to see as a new generation of youngsters like yourself is you're recognizing, wait a minute, there has always been wisdom, but many times wisdom was localized to where the whole world was full of lies. Now the internet, at least you've got some good stuff there now, and it's worthwhile doing, but it is caked over by all of the lies that have always been there.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard the expression that a lie gets out of bed and travels around the world before the truth can get its pants on.
Never heard it.
And so basically what we're doing with this meditation, and the people of the world are beginning to wake up to meditation, though they're not quite practicing it correctly, but they're going in the right direction.
This is what I've been thinking about. A lot of these mindfulness and meditation apps, whether they're like just how beneficial they are in the long run.
Well, they will be good in the beginning because the student is actually having the right kind of desire, and he thinks that the application is going to do something, so that he expects something out of it. Then he gets good in the middle because he's decided that he could really do this thing quite well. And then it's good in the end when he is an expert at it and kind of abandons it, looking for the next step. Okay.
I guess this is these are the steps that I took. But the thing is, it's like with some of the apps, it's like spiritual materialism is baked right into the advertising, right into the core idea of the app. So just you know, when you read through something like in spiritual materialism, they talk of the detrimental effects of this. So I do wonder.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. I was thinking that an app that was going to help teach mindfulness, that's all it was doing. I didn't even consider that it would be also having advertisements.
Oh no, yeah, no. There's this whole thing like mindfulness or something they're calling it, where it's like meditation is all about augmenting your daily life to make you more of a successful person and whatnot. It's like when the army are teaching soldiers breath meditation, breath meditation, so that they can aim a gun more steady and stuff and things like this.
Yes, it does take mindfulness of breathing. That's one of the most important qualities of a sniper. That he's got to empty things so that he can really look at what's going on, and he has to hold his breath, because even his body's breathing will move the gun. So he'll miss the target. So he's got to, I mean, gosh, a whole lot of anapanasati is needed for being a sniper. But being a sniper is not Dhamma.
This is the thing. This is what some of the discussion is saying. It's like, well, if we're teaching soldiers anapanasati, is the anapanasati going to awaken some sort of inner compassion in them and make them not want to shoot the gun?
Well, that would be serendipity. It depends. Okay, that would be it would be possible for a troop, either out in battle or out in maneuvers or whatever, that this guy just stands up and says, "Why am I here? What's the whole point of this?
This whole frontal lobe thing you're talking about.
Right, it's a ridiculous struggle. I'm out of here, folks. I'll see you later." And then the next guy stands up and he walks out. And within 3 to 5 minutes, the whole group, the whole troop has abandoned their post and just said, "I'm out of here. I quit. Not only do I quit this post, I quit the army. I'm out, put me in jail." And there are a few that are like that. The one that's really both surprising and also possibly the most easy to understand. Do you know that Muhammad Ali, I forget his name, Cassius Clay, right?
Cassius Clay, yeah.
He spent several years in prison. You know why?
Why?
They even robbed him of his title because he was drafted into the army to go to Vietnam and he refused to go. The very best boxer, the one who held the world title, he knew what fighting was. He knew what boxing was, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And he spent 3 years in prison. Okay, so that's possible. So the answer to your question in that regard is yes, under the right circumstances, with the right training, anapanasati then becomes dangerous for a military to teach their troops, because it will make the troops better troops for a while. But when they get up to a certain level, they'll recognize they don't want to be troops anymore. This was also part of the reason why most armies used only young men. They want them from actually, we want them down to 14, but the mothers wouldn't want to let them go. So we'll say 17. At the age of 17, up until about 23, is when the young man is impressionable enough that you could put him through that kind of stuff and he'll do it. A 35-year-old man or a 40-year-old man, or certainly a 75-year-old man, if you put him into basic training, he'll just look that drill instructor that's yelling at the top of his voice right in the eye and yell right back up, "Fuck you!" But you see, the kid won't do that because the kid is still thinking that he's a kid. And that, in fact, what they will do then is to place their moms or their dads or their preachers or their teacher's face on this drill instructor, and that they will go into it with the idea that the drill instructor's job is to break him down and break down his ego so that they can build him back up as part of the unit. The spirit of the Corps, the spirit of the Corps. This is the whole point of it is that we want this child to no longer be a solid individual and to become part of the crowd. We just want him to do it really quickly. We don't want to have to give him a 4-year college education and give him a job and make him buy a house and give him a wife and all of that before he finally fits in, because even then it doesn't work very well. The example or the evidence of why it doesn't work very well is look how many yachts and how many Harley Davidsons there are. Why? Why do the guys buy those things? Is because they're still looking for the joy that they did not get by joining the crowd. That joining the crowd was a safety maneuver, but it was not going to fulfill anything more than that. And it comes from the human being's herding instinct. Just like the herd, look at animals like wildebeest or even lions live in a pride. Monkeys will collect together on a platform up in the trees for the night. Hello. And so we keep our families, we keep them tight. But the big family is, if you're in a herd of wildebeest, the wildebeest who is in the center of the herd is the most safe, because the lions have got to go through a whole crowd of wildebeest before he can get to him. And so the center of the place is always the safest. Now, with that mentality not being put to good use, what that means is, for humans, the one who is the most popular or the one who is in the middle of the thing has the high status position. That happens in high schools. Okay. It also happens in military in the boot camp barracks, that the DIs go looking for those kids who have already been in the middle of their pack or the middle of their herd, and he immediately, part of the training with the recruits in the boot camp is to break them out of their old mentality of a herd. So the kids who have been the most popular at school or the football star, that kind of kid, is ostracized.
Cliques form everywhere, and they never stop forming. I was talking about it with a friend when I went to university. I was surprised at how cliquey people still got.
It's instinctual.
It's instinctual. This is the thing. I hadn't realized this at that point, but yeah. It's everywhere.
It is.
And I still find it myself. I still definitely feel more comfort being with a group of people. Or like I noticed a friend, he only just recently gained like a good group of friends for the first time in a few years, and it's just the level of comfort and contentedness that's come with it for him has been really helpful.
So now let's look at it from the opposite perspective. Is that if any individual in that clique or that group, or maybe even an outside kid, an outcast, if he starts working with mindfulness and begins to understand where and how his own fear comes from, so that he begins to be fearless, then he recognizes at a very easy and deep level how ridiculous it is for wanting to join a clique.
Mm-hmm.
That he's already an outsider, and he knows it. Okay, and almost always the new kid on the block. Let me tell you something about that. There was a time when I was really young. Uh, my grandfather died when I was 6, and by the age of 8, uh, my mother had talked my dad into moving back to North Carolina from Oklahoma. So while I was in Oklahoma, I was in the situation that an example was the building, the school building, the primary school had been blown down by a tornado, and that my grandfather rebuilt that school. So that was the kind of status that the teachers knew me. And it was through the teachers then that knew, and the reason that the teachers knew me was because my grandfather made sure that they remembered that he was the one that built this school that they're in. Okay, so he implanted that. But when I got when after he died at the age of 8 and moving back to North Carolina, my dad had trouble finding a job, and when he did find one, it was installation of natural gas equipment. And so we moved from one town to another, and we only stayed in a town about 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So that inner circle, or that inner trust, was lost for me by 7, 8 years old, and then was never regained. That I was always an outsider. I never lived in a town long enough to ever become anything other than the object of disrespect for the clique that wouldn't let me in. And not only that, but most of the towns that we lived in was South Carolina, which was intentionally racist.
Mm-hmm.
And so any kind of an outsider is naturally from the wrong side of the tracks. It doesn't matter, where the tracks are. And so, being met always with suspicion, I was a loner. Now I did have a few friends, but surprisingly, the friends that I did have were also those that had moved into town and were outsiders. So us outsiders generally had our own kind of tiny little clique together, but it was still not part of the, the mainstream. An example of that was Nathan Goldman. His family was Jewish, and believe me, a Jewish family in a small town in South Carolina is a good opportunity for ostracism.
Yeah.
But he and I were close friends. He also had a nephew, not a nephew, a cousin who moved into the town because of the Jewish family already there, and Mrs. Goldman, the grandmother, was there, and so I taught this kid. Uh, he became part of our group a little bit, but he was much younger. His name was Benjamin Bernanke, and he was the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the United States during the Obama administration.
Mm.
And so that would be one of the ways of having that click or that connection was that I taught chess to the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Except that Ben may not even remember me because he was only 14 at the time.
Sure, he would.
Okay, so and I haven't been in contact with him, but anyway, the point that we're making then continues along. When I started to get into psychology,
Mm-hmm.
this had always been there, this outsider kind of thing, and basically each teacher had their kind of group or collection, and that happens even at the level to where this is the group that would be doing group therapy together with the trainer. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
there was a time when many of these groups got together with their trainers because of some outside class thing that was happening. I think it would be something like Bander and Grinder, who did NLP, came.
Yeah, Bandler. Yeah.
Okay, so when you've got the entire student body of this or this part of the university together, and one student brings this issue up about the cliques,
Mm-hmm.
and was saying that this place is really, really cliquey. And that everybody has their own cliques, and part of the cliques determine which teacher you have. And so if the teacher is really high in the status of the teachers, then all of his students then have a leg up on being part of the high clique. And I saw that also in high school too. So one of the professors decided, let's do a real survey. This is good enough. And so the point was is that everybody writes down on a piece of paper 5 names of people that they know are in the clique or on the in group,
Mm-hmm.
the insiders. Okay, so they set it on 5, and then they during a break they sit down and they tallied all of that stuff up. And then, teacher by teacher, they started listing who was there. And the part that was so surprising to me is that I was considered to be one of the in group. And that blew me away.
Huh?
The only reason that I was considered an in person was because I had been there a long time. But in fact, it had to do with how long you were associated with the organization, had more to do with it than anything else. And not only that, but many of the people who were in the clique, as chosen by the entire student body, didn't think that they were part of the clique. And not only that, but those who made it into the clique in the sense of the top 5 people on the board, those 5 people, many of them didn't associate with each other.
Mm.
And so it was like this whole idea of the in group has to do with each individual person feeling the way he does about the group and whether he's on the inside of it or not, without having enough information. So
Yeah.
this whole
See,
thing
getting at.
really blew my mind about this idea that everybody wants to be in the clique, but the clique is still not very well defined.
No.
It's just that we're either I'm in the clique or I'm not in the clique. And it's always a mental thing.
Yeah.
So if we understand it like that, intellectually, we can begin to practice it that way. That in fact, you do not need to be part of the herd. That's an instinct.
Mm-hmm.
That yes, we are built with social systems, and that we are a part of society. And so we have to deal with people. Let's deal with them friendly as if they were already part of the clique, part of the inner group. Part of whose inner group? This inner
Or is this is one of those 4 points of clinging, isn't it, as well?
Precisely.
Yeah.
This is in fact this
The
attachment to views.
Yeah.
Which the attachment to views, the attachment to rites, rules, and rituals, you see, are very, very close together.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the distinction between the nesting instinct and the territory instinct are related. That naturally the nest is going to be in the territory. And so the territory is like your outer boundary, and the nest is like the inner part, the place where it's the most safe. But leaving the territory, and now you're getting into danger. I would go so far as to say one of the things that is going to help the world become more peaceful and not have so many wars is that more and more people travel so they begin to see the world and not stay in their small little town or their small little clique. That in fact, that's part of why the internet is so valuable, is that I can see 4 or 5 videos of Timbuktu and know all about Timbuktu without having to go to Timbuktu.
Mm-hmm.
But there is really no substitute for actually traveling and to get out into the world and begin to see other cultures as to how they're similar and how they're different than the culture that I was raised in.
Mm-hmm.
But many people don't have that. So in a way, that at the time perceived as torture of always being an outsider when I was a child actually led or gave the tools that were needed to be able to see things in a different way than kids who were raised in the same school with the same kids for all 12 years.
I know what you're saying, because sort of similarly in high school, my group were also like a group of outsiders who'd been sort of, you know, sort of different in a way to everyone else. And what that has given me is a very sort of anthropological view of people. So when I'm going out into the world, I'm often removed, removed one step back, sort of thinking in more of like an anthropological sense.
Yes. Well, that kind of view is then, let us say, an extra push or an extra piece of juice into the direction of waking up
Mm-hmm.
or expanding the mind.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also see how people who never traveled, who are part of an in group or a clique within a small town area like that, those people, when they get out of high school, they try to maintain that clique. And it's really hard to do. That most, in many places in small towns, people leave.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, it's the boys who leave and the girls who stay, and then they have trouble finding marriage partners. And it's just a really interesting thing
Oh,
that
really?
happens.
That's interesting, because I've found it was completely different in Malaysia and Japan. When I went there, it was the girls who were leaving the small towns, and it was the guys who were staying.
Hmm.
That was in Malaysia. I went to this village, and all the girls had left. There was like two or three who were around, you know.
Uh, could that have possibly been because they couldn't get jobs in the village and were
This this
forced to
this this
leave?
was this was it. Yeah. Not necessarily forced to leave, because there is sort of work, but not as much work. Well, I always thought it was more about spreading the gene pool and looking for the you know, that biological need, like to say that sort of instinct to go and find the most suitable mate for spreading the gene pool.
That's right. And the boys that the girl was raised with, unless she's dating one of them when she's young, by the time she's old enough to see what's going on, she recognizes that all these boys that she was raised with are not good enough. And she wants to go find something better. Yes, there's definitely that mentality at play also. But let's get a little bit more back. We've gone
Yeah, we have.
down the tube uh, um, that we were talking about how casino meditations um, gave rise to the understanding of the Satipatthana. So basically, what we can say is all of this instinctual stuff that we were talking about now really is not of much value.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's of not much value, because that's the way everybody is. We're just talking about how things are, but how things are, we already kind of know that. And that we've been thinking about it a lot. So now it's time to start regulating or monitoring the kind of thoughts that we have that has been giving us the kind of behaviors and lifestyle that everybody else has. Let's start um, upping the game. And the way that we do that is by intentionally limiting the kind of thoughts that we're going to have. In the sutras, the Buddha talks about it is what's worthy of one's wise attention. Let me get that out, because this is basically what I'm doing right now, is the whole point of what we've been talking about. And I want to make sure that I've got the right. Okay. He's talking about attention. And when we use the word attention, that means we attend to, and that this is akin to then mindfulness, or that which we're paying attention to. And so paying attention means that we're in attending.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than mindfulness. That's different than sati, but it's more correct for mindfulness. So when they use the word mindfulness, we're not really talking about sati. That sati is something else. Sati is to remember to pay wise attention. It's the wake up itself. It's like you've heard the phrase to wake up and smell the coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the smelling of the coffee, that's what we're paying attention to. We're attending to the coffee smell. But before we did that, we had to wake up. So that's how we use these two things. The sati is the wake up. We got to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the number one skill to be developed, is to constantly wake up and to wake up and to wake up. And how we do this is by reapplying attention. An example of that would be that a student can have sati and recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath. So he comes back and he takes a deep breath. But then the sati can go away, or sati can actually go away before he even gets the breath. Because they have thoughts like, oh, monkey mind, oh, this meditation is so hard, oh, there that mind goes again, oh, poor me, Well, he hasn't even started the meditation. He had a moment of sati, but now the sati has gotten lost into the bad feelings about how bad his sati is. And this is very, very common. This is so common that every student has to be mindful to not do that, but when sati does come, to actually come back to the breath and start paying attention to the breath. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to keep coming back. So if we're actually then practicing more correctly when we're mindful of breathing or anapanasati, what that actually means is that sati comes up with every in-breath, and sati comes up with every out-breath.
Mm-hmm.
If sati doesn't come up with every in-breath and doesn't come up with every out-breath, then there's no sati. We forget the breath, and off we go.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, we're saying that sati did not come just when I recognized that the mind had wandered away from the breath, and that was the wake-up call. Oh, no, we want to keep that wake-up call coming. We want to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
We want sati and sati and sati and more sati.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to start doing that through paying wise attention. Now, this wise attention that the Buddha is talking about, he talks about it in the sense of the Four Noble Truths. Now, the Four Noble Truths is actually part of the Dhammanupassana in the Satipatthana Sutta,
Mm-hmm.
which means that what is it that's worthy of paying attention to with the body, okay? What's worthy of paying attention to the body is the breathing, the sensations, the touch, all of that stuff that wakens the body up, that would be called the proprioceptive and feeling system,
Mm-hmm.
along with the breathing. So what is it that when we wake up the Dhammanupassana, what is it that we're going to be paying attention to? We're going to be paying attention to the here now in relationship to the Four Noble Truths. because this is the basic teaching of the Buddha. You could go so far as to say, is there suffering right now? I'm paying attention to suffering. Is there any suffering? What is it that's unhappy? What kind of thoughts am I having? Why am I dissatisfied in this moment? So we begin to attend to that. We begin to pay wise attention to the suffering if it's there. We also begin to pay wise attention to what was the cause of suffering. Generally, the cause of suffering is because I want something. Generally, for most people, especially when they get old, is what they want is they want to come out from under the burden of remembered hurt. And we often do that with thoughts of revenge. I'm going to get that guy. So that's suffering.
Yeah.
Wanting revenge rather than wanting goodwill for that guy who hurt me. So that means that I also have to inspect that hurt and that ill will that I have. And so these are the things that are worthy of attention as we begin to pay attention to what is the source of my displeasure? What is the source of my unhappiness? And then the next one, which is really the one that's the most beneficial here, is to start paying attention to the times when you're free from suffering, because you are. If you were suffering 100% of the time, all the time, you'd be in great misery. But people don't suffer all the time. We go in and out of it and in and out of it. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to pay wise attention to when we go in, how and why we've been in, and what we can do to get ourselves back out of suffering so that we can be in that third noble truth. Now, that third noble truth can also be thought of as a little nibbana, a source of pleasure. This is the whole point, then, of practicing anapanasati, is to get ourselves, at least for a little while, out of the first and second noble truth into the third noble truth. And that the path to do that is the Eightfold Noble Path that we've already been harping on. Okay, so now what we're going to do with our limiting of our thoughts is to begin to pay wise attention to these Four Noble Truths in operation. That the Four Noble Truths are no longer something that we read about in a book or that we answer on questions on an exam, that we take it out of conceptualization into experience.
They are the practice.
We actually begin to practice and experience the third noble truth. We begin to practice and experience sati, right noble sati, to keep waking up, to wake up, to wake up. We begin to experience and operate and know that we're doing it with right effort. Yes, this is the right effort. I know it's right effort because it's easy effort. It's not frustratingly hard effort. It's easy effort. I can come right back. And by doing that, I automatically then go into that state of joy or the state of the third noble truth. That this is something that's to be practiced because the mind's normal state is to fall back into junk thoughts that are then punctuated by painful moments or painful memories or a desire to do something or a feeling of incompleteness, thinking that, oh, if I go buy that new whiz-bang, I'll feel better. Because whiz-bangs may make you feel better for a little while, but when you become the whiz-bang, then it's
become the whiz bang.
Right. Then we've got something going. Now, here's the point about that. To actually understand the second noble truth, we unpack that into understanding actually how the mind works. Okay. So the full frame of reference is like this. We practice anapanasati or breathing meditation for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness, the satipatthana. We practice and fulfill the four foundations of mindfulness in order for us to fulfill or complete the Eightfold Noble Path. In other words, we're working with the Eightfold Noble Path, but in the Anapanasati Sutta, it doesn't talk about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path the way that it does in the Satipatthana Sutta. Here is talking about the Sambhojana, the 7 factors of enlightenment. But if you inspect closely the 7 factors of enlightenment, what that means is that when they're factors of enlightenment, they have been fulfilled. These are now the skills that are in full bloom, that we were originally walking the path in order to develop. And so the 7 factors of enlightenment are nothing more than the full-on development of the Eightfold Noble Path. And that part of the unification then, or part of the result of it, is the unification of mind, which in the Anapanasati Sutta is talked about, that this is done for the fulfillment of knowledge and deliverance. Now, I'm not sure that I like the word deliverance. That's the one that Bhikkhu Bodhi chose. So that's the one that's in his translation. But another word would be deliverance. Another word for deliverance would be freedom or moksha. Sort of like a prison, that when you're released from prison, that means that they deliver you to the door of prison and out you go. So this is what we mean by deliverance. It doesn't mean that it's delivering you to a place. It means it's delivering you from a place.
Like release.
Okay. So another way of thinking about it is when we use the word freedom, we use the word freedom in the sense of freedom from and freedom to. For instance, the kid at home, he wants freedom to go to town. He wants freedom to go see his girlfriend. But the freedom that the Buddha is talking about is freedom from, and in this case, the freedom from wanting to go to town. Or the freedom from wanting to go see the girl. This is the freedom that we're looking for, is the freedom from, which means the deliverance from something. What is this something that we're being delivered from? Is the burdens of life. What are the burdens of life? Well, these are the burdens that the instinctual system used for self-preservation in the old days, before humans had good wisdom and good society. Now that we know how to think, our job then is to give up our instinctual ways of doing things and our instinctual feelings, and do it instead from wisdom. In other words, I go once a year to get the visa in Thailand and get all the papers ready, not because of fear that that problems will happen. But this was a process that had to go through. Now I can do through it through wisdom, because I can say I've done it year after year. I know that there's going to be some changes. I know there's going to be surprises. I know that there's going to be a long line at the place, and I'm ready for it, and I can handle it. Rather than being there full of fear, and then all of the big line, and now we get full of more fear, and then we get up to the front of the line, and now our papers are not correct, and we've got to come back later after we go find the papers either across the street, or maybe have to go back to the island that we're on and come back another day, you see. So if we can do this without fear, we generally do a whole lot better job of whatever it is that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Because we're doing it through wisdom. So that it's a completely different new way of operating. And yet we're not trained to operate from wisdom. We are trained to operate through our instinctual systems instead. That we, in fact, we use it with our kids. We intentionally keep them trapped in their instinctual system. An example of that is, go clean your room. Why? I don't want to clean my room. And the answer is, you go clean your room because I told you to clean your room, and I'm the boss. In other words, you're not giving the kid freedom. But, and this is actually an example, I think it was with Nick, when what he did was that he went in, he played basketball with his kid.
Mm-hmm.
knowing that he wanted to have the room cleaned up, but so did the kid. So now let's make a big game out of it. And so the kid picks up every toy, and dad holds the basket so that he can clean up his room. And all the dad's doing is standing there and smiling. But if the dad tells the kid, you go clean your room, then whether or not the kid cleans his room or not, it's not going to be an enjoyable experience.
Mm.
He's going to be alone. He's going to be away from his dad. He's going to be afraid of it. He really remembers playing with the toys the way that they were, and he wants to leave them that way because of fond memories. All kinds of reasons for the kid to feel bad, when in fact, if the father was wise, then they could get the room cleaned up joyfully. So, another way that is, in fact, is just another actual example of the exact same thing, and that is, we tell our kids, you got to go to school, you got to learn your ABCs. Very few kids will continuously bell, why do I have to learn my ABCs? And the answers are always not useful. You got to learn your ABCs so you can learn to read. Why do I learn to read? Because you got to learn things. Okay. But if you can make learning a game so that the child enjoys it, then the kid will be able to learn on his own all kinds of things, because he's doing it from the things that he's interested in, not the things that he's forced by grades and teachers and stuff to do. That in fact, that's one of the major reasons why some kids drop out of school and become brilliant, and others who stay in school have to wait until they get their PhD before they could be brilliant, because they were spending all of their time doing what they were told to do rather than spending their time doing what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we then change this whole method of system? Is that you people, when like yourself, begin to understand, I have been living my life according to a set of rules, a set of procedures, a set of things that had to do with the way that I felt. And that if I begin to change the way that I feel and see things differently from a point of wisdom, then I'm going to have a completely better life.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what the real teachings of the Buddha is all about, is let's pay wise attention to these Four Noble Truths of, why am I feeling bad? What is this suffering? What's the source of it? Etc. like that. Or another way of thinking about it, but it's actually the same procedure. But instead of asking the questions, let us say that you have practicing anapanasati to the point that you get yourself into a really, really good state of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sukha. You really have arrived now at step number 6 of anapanasati. And so now the idea, or the point is, let's maintain this. Let's not slide back into ordinary mentality. Let's maintain this. How can we maintain it? This is the point when wholesome thoughts become absolutely essential. Because if we start having unwholesome thoughts while we're satisfied, those unwholesome thoughts will then have dissatisfaction creep in, and we'll lose that state. That we can actually still watch the breath, but we haven't brought ourselves up to that level of complete satisfaction.
Can
So
we become satisfied with, well, not sort of throw a bit of satisfaction into the mix when we're having unwholesome thoughts to move us back into wholesome thoughts?
say that again.
Can we be satisfied with unwholesome thoughts? Can we be satisfied with things that are not, like what I'm saying, things that are not good, to then bring on, or to sort of prod out that satisfaction, or to prod out wholesome thoughts?
Give me an example.
An example. Well, like so, say we're in Anapanasati, and I'm all of a sudden I had a bit of satisfaction, but then all of a sudden I get distracted by something that happened to me a few years ago or something, which was this is exactly what was happening this morning. Can I then cultivate satisfaction with satisfaction maybe with the here now rather than the unwholesome thought itself, to indirectly get rid of the unwholesome thought?
Okay, you answered your question.
Yeah, I did answer my question. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you did. You answered your question. So let's look at that. The first thing to look at is the fact that generally in the thinking part of the mind, there's only one thought at a time, kind of like telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so that thinking part of the mind can only be thinking of one thing at a time. Part of sati, or part of the waking up process, has to do with recognizing what the mind was thinking before, which was something that happened yesterday or something that happened a long time ago. And so now the new thought that's coming with the wakey, which would be considered step 10 of Anapanasati, is to gladden the mind, because while you're thinking about that bad thing that happened so long ago, it doesn't feel good. But recognizing that you don't have to think about that, that feels good.
Mm-hmm.
That, hey, out you go, and that I use the term normally, aha, I caught you, aha, I see you, or there you are. Okay, you've come up again, and this is unwholesome. But then the wholesome part is to recognize that that's what you were doing. And so now you can come back with the intention of having only wholesome thoughts. Hopefully, we're at the point in time where our sukha is really good, so that when that thought happened, you caught it really quickly. Mm-hmm. Immediately, as soon as you had the thought and had the associated bad feeling with it, you say, hey, that's not where we're going. I'm going to stay satisfied. Out you go. And I'm going to come back and have my thoughts that are associated with the here now. Now, as we begin to break down the Four Noble Truths by watching and experience it in the here now over time, and we begin to look at how the mind operates, that basically how the mind operates is based upon feeling, and that there's a whole lot of stuff that happens before we feel, but these things happen in really rapid succession, and that by the time that feeling arises, it's already gotten polluted by the way that we think. And I'll get to that later. In fact, what I'm doing now is I'm at kind of the end of our talk. Yeah. I'm giving you a lead in into the beginning of what is called paticca samuppada, or how does the mind actually work? Mm-hmm. How do we get ourselves into a state of feeling, and then what do we do with it? The answer is, if we are ignorant, or if we're not watching what's going on, then that bad feeling or that good feeling or that confused feeling will always inevitably wind up in the creation of suffering that is dependent upon a self to suffer. Mm-hmm. I suffer. Suffering doesn't matter if it's not happening to me. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, we can have compassion for others. We can see the suffering for others. But by doing that, we also see that it's the me in each one of those people who is suffering that experiences the suffering. Okay, so paticca samuppada is the sequence of events that goes from seeing things or thinking about something through the perception of it into the creation of an internal representation. And we'll talk a whole lot more about that internal representation next time. But this is the point that you can understand is no one lives in the actual real reality of their life or the world. They live in a momentary by moment reconstructed reality of that which they experienced based upon their past. For instance, a child sees a tree and they don't see the same tree that the adult sees in the tree because the adult remembers falling out of that tree. So every time he looks at that tree, it's got a feeling that's associated with him falling out, but his son doesn't have that. Even if the dad tells him, I fell out of that tree one time, you be careful, still the kid doesn't have the same feeling about the tree that the dad did, okay, because of his experience. This is what we mean by we never actually experience the world directly. We always experience our view of the world that's always reconstructed out of our past memories. That in fact, the word tree is also stored information. Without that kind of sankara, you just look and you don't even know what it is that you see. It's only forms and shapes and colors.
It's like there is no subjective reality.
There's no subjective reality at all. Or let us say there's no objective reality. It's all subjective. And what we mean by subjective is that we insert the subject of self into the real reality. That we subject ourselves to something that is created rather than what's on the outside. So as a recap then, we're practicing to get the mind in a state that's both satisfied and capable of seeing things to a very deep level, starting with what is suffering? Am I suffering right now? Or am I out of suffering? What is the path to suffering? So we review and we go over, this is sati, this is right effort, this is right attitude. And we start to work a lot with right attitude. I'm going to have the attitude of a winner, the attitude of a lion. And so we begin to develop that. This is the things that is worthy of paying attention to and spending our time on, rather than thoughts and feelings of the past.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant.
And so as we get developed into doing this and paying more and more attention to what's going on, we actually begin to see how the mind is working. That's what we're going to be talking about next. I'll introduce and develop the 5 aggregates, and then Paticca Samuppada. Now, surprisingly enough, in the Satipatthana Sutta, the 5 aggregates are actually mentioned and spoken of, but not Paticca Samuppada directly. But I think that's because the sutta was already getting really long. And so we'll start then with the 5 aggregates, but you can see that the 5 aggregates are nothing but the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Yeah.
You got bodies, you got feelings, you got mind, you got, it's all there. So now we're going to start looking at it from the aggregates, and the aggregates then are the foundation of what we use for the process of Paticca Samuppada. So we have the foundation, or the things that actually exist, none of which are self. The body is not a self. The feelings are not a self. We associate and identify our feelings as my feelings, but that happens later on. The feelings themselves are not yours. They're just part of the body, part of the process that the body is in.
Yeah.
And so we'll discuss this next time.
Yeah. Brilliant. That was really, really excellent talk, Dhammarato. I'll have to unpack that one. Yeah.
All right. Well,
all right.
We'll put this on the internet, or you can get it right off of Skype. This is worth of you reviewing.
Definitely. Yeah. One quick question, very quick. September, October is when I'm planning on coming to Thailand. Or I was planning on going on a meditation retreat somewhere. I'm looking at Thailand.
Okay.
Is this a good period of time for you, if I potentially do come and stay with you?
I don't know. I suppose every day's a holiday.
I'm just making sure there's no, like rain festival or something going on in Thailand that gets in the way.
There are seasons, but I would say that should not be a major issue for you.
Okay.
Here's something that you can plan on, and that is that I would highly recommend that you do a retreat at Deepa Bhawan with Dhammarato. And
How
the
do you
date,
how do you spell that?
I'll send you a link.
Okay, thank you.
And that their retreats are normally on about the 20th of the month. So we can, after you see the link and do your planning, we can figure out what time of the month it is that you want to arrive here and what you do immediately before the retreat and immediately after the retreat. Okay.
Yep.
But that would be the thing that you should plan on your arrival date. So you could get here a few days before that and sit on my porch with me and then go over to the retreat would be an option.
Yep. Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll talk to you next time about that.
See you next time, Dhammarato. Have a good
Okay.
one. Bye.
Bye-bye.